Welcome to Christian Meditation Prayer of the Heart. Today my guest is Bishop Jason Gordon, Bishop of Bridgetown, Barbados, and the diocese, so two dioceses, and the Diocese of Kingstown in St. Vincent. And I was reminded a little earlier when chatting with Bishop Jason that St. Vincent is about, how far again?
About 90 miles away. 90
miles away from Barbados. So that's just to locate us in this region. Bishop Jason is also a member of the Living Water community, which makes Trinity Network possible, Trinity TV, and was part of one of the founding people, if my memory serves me right, in the communication side of Living Water, and therefore no stranger to Trinity TV.
Very much no stranger.
Welcome, Bishop Jason. If I refer to Bishop as Father Jason or as Jason, you have to allow me a little bit of that because that could easily happen. So I'm giving that as a disclaimer at the top. Bishop Jason, I have it's really very lovely to have you here and to have you here in Trinidad and to have you on the set with me. And I really and truly, I've spent a little bit of time this week, partly in preparation for this whole half hour with you, or near half hour. I've spent some time reading your pastoral letter, which is called And Their Eyes Were Opened, correct?
Correct. Something
I understand you wrote last year and have used for different purposes, including a retreat in Trinidad and Tobago, which I have been part of. And some of the things there have struck me, and I thought they might be useful for me to use as an introduction or to allow us into this interview. To, at least for the first part of it, maybe do a little exploration of your thoughts, theologically and otherwise, on contemplative prayer and meditation practice in particular, as a method or methodology or form of accessing the contemplative space. So I just, in the letter you begin with, or you make reference to that beautiful story in the text on the story of the road to Emmaus.
Oh, yes, yes.
And I want to just use one little verse from it or one little line, and allow you to start there. So this, on the road to Emmaus, which is a story we all know, so I'm not going to go through it, but there is one line when the two apostles who are walking toward Emmaus and are joined by this apparent stranger, they arrive at Emmaus after the encounter between them along the way, but then the stranger, who's still a stranger at that point, decides that he is not staying in the village. They are staying, Cleopas and his friend are staying in the village, and the apparent stranger is moving on. And these are the words at that point. This is verse 29. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening, and the day is almost over." From my perspective, reading the story, rereading the story, and from my, let's for want of a better word, say bias toward meditation practice and this form of prayer, to me, in this story, that's really what stands out or stood out as that portal into it. Because for me, it's so much the invitation into contemplative prayer, into interiority, into the presence from both perspectives. But it struck me so much as our invitation and our insistence, because I love the word strongly.
Yes.
They urged him strongly, even though they were not...
It wasn't a passing fad. It wasn't, well, if you have a little time, or if you have nothing else to do, or
why don't you?
Or why don't you? Or we're going to have something to eat, so join.
No,
and
it
was very purposeful.
Yeah.
So it's a purposeful statement. There was also the sense of something that was happening that they were not conscious of. So it's something that's happening in their unconscious. That they sense there's something about this stranger, but they can't quite put their finger on it. So there's something about that too. But there's a resolve. There is a desire. It starts from an inner desire for something. So, and that inner desire is that what they were talking about, which only later they will say, were not our hearts burning within us when we talked with him on the road. But even now they're recognizing that something is here that they can't quite understand. And so they stay with us for the night is pressing on, is really the being caught up in the something that they can't put their finger on just yet. It will happen shortly, but at this moment they can't quite. But there is something that is happening that is engaging them on levels that they're not conscious of it. But at the same time, it is intriguing, and it's drawing them in, and that's really the process of what I call the life of grace. Because the life of grace, which was the first pastoral letter I wrote, is the most precious gift that God has ever given to us. Now, there are many ways to the life of grace, and certainly Christian meditation is one of those paths that carry us to that encounter with Christ, that allows the life of grace to flourish within us. And that's what these two are experiencing. Something stirring in the heart. Something stirring that is a little more than normal conversation. Something, an existential itch being reached that they couldn't get to before. Something. And so the insistence of the stay with us and the urging strongly, it's all that movement of what I will call the life of grace that leads then they've already had the encounter, but they don't know that they've had it, but it leads now to the eyes being opened in the breaking of the bread. So it's this wonderful dynamism of the spiritual life.
And the beautiful clarity for me that the invitation has to come from us.
Yes.
Because they urged him strongly, stay with us. And that's when the whole thing
shifts.
Correct?
Because, bless John Paul has said so many times, God will never impose. God will always propose. And so it's our invitation to God that allows God to do the most marvelous things with us. Without that invitation, God will want to, God will desire to, God will propose to, but God will never impose himself, because that invitation must come from our side.
Right.
When we give the invitation, God can do marvelous things with it.
And then as the story goes on, as you said earlier, in staying with them, he joins them, and then they become, in the breaking of the bread, which follows in the meal, they recognize him, and then of course he disappears.
And the text is so wonderful, you know. And there's this start to eat. He took the bread and he broke the bread, and their eyes were open, and he disappeared from their sight.
Right.
I mean, bam, bam,
Bam and bam.
Three action statements, yes. You know, that are nearly disconnected in one sense,
yes.
but they're so totally connected. Right. Because once the eyes are opened, and they now recognize him, not by looking at him physically, but by looking back at the encounter that they had just come through, and replaying that in their mind and understanding in hindsight everything that had happened. But that's true for the whole gospel, because the whole gospel is written from the perspective of its end, of the resurrection of Christ. The infancy and all the miracles is all from this perspective. It's only in hindsight, looking backwards, that we really understand the truth of what God has done and the way that God has been with us. And that's true for every spiritual experience.
Well, what I liked, the connections that I made, again, reading the letter again, was it so describes for me meditation practice into the contemplative encounter. Because the process of the method, meditation practice itself, is an invitation. It's a very quiet one. I mean, there's no sit here now strongly, but there is this, all the musings of your inner life, of your inner self, and the confusion and the, you know, that sort of brings you to even sit.
Yes.
And I love the bit that the evening is coming and the day is is
almost
nearly
on,
over,
yeah.
almost over. There is always this sense of something's coming to an end as well, and a certain sort of apprehension. But in the invitation, you sit, and in sitting, the sitting is an invitation into presence.
And it's an
the
invitation to God.
And an invitation, well, it's an invitation to
To
God's
God.
presence.
And it's an
to join
invitation,
you.
But it's also the invitation that we are giving to God to stay with us.
Right.
Now, what's interesting is that we don't often stay with God.
But God's always there.
God is always staying with us.
Yes.
So even the invitation
Yes.
and insisting and
Yes.
strongly
Yes.
for God to stay with us is really reinforcing the invitation
For us.
that is coming from our side
Right.
to God to do what God does best.
Right.
As opposed for us to do what we want God to do. And it is that surrendering of our will, our mind, our intellect, our heart to God that is really the beginning of the life of grace.
Yeah.
And it's what the Christian meditation is about. We take up so many things, we hoard so many things, we gather and collect so many things. And the whole of the Christian meditation is letting it go.
Right.
Letting go the thought, letting go the thousand. I love the description. When you first start meditating, it's like 1,000 different monkeys start jumping up and down in your head. And it's just letting those, that's Cassian's thing, letting that go. And just really saying, Lord, stay with us.
Stay with me.
And you know, sometimes in meditation, you have to be a little insistent on it, huh? You have to say it insistently. You have to insist, Lord, we want to say to you insistently, stay with us, Lord.
But of course, in our method, that is simply by the repetition of the mantra. So,
well, it's the three things. It's the repetition of the mantra, it's the breath,
yes,
it's the posture.
Yes.
The body posture,
Yeah.
the mantra, the mind, the breath, which connects the whole of us. And it's the three things, those three are the invitation, stay with us, Lord.
Yes.
And when we need to say stay with us, say it strongly to him, it's really because in the three is one single invitation that I have set aside this time for you, and I really want to spend it with you. But if you don't stay with me, my mind is going to go to every other thing. And the monkeys are going to have their sway with me.
Yeah. Let's talk now a little bit about the encounter in that 20 minutes or 30 minutes, or the opportunity you give yourself to be in God's presence. The breaking of the bread within that time, after the invitation, when God allows you to see him.
You know, many times, my experience, I like the word bumble. I bumbled into meditation at 19 years old, or 20 years old. I was on a retreat, and they gave me a text. I went out to pray with this text. I didn't know what to do at 19 or 20 years old, how to pray with a text. So I read it once or twice, and I went on, and just sat in absolute stillness, and nothing happened. And literally nothing happened. And I came back complaining. But when I got into the group and we started sharing, insights started to flow. Now, there was no meditation on the text in a classic sense. There was no Lectio Divina of reading and looking at every word and nuance. But there was something that was taking place. And the person who I spoke to was wise enough to say, oh, that's a very good problem to have. Many people would like to have this problem and they don't have it. God is calling you to a different type of prayer, and you need to shift the way that you're praying. Now, in the meditation, like in the story, it's only after that we start understanding where the encounter was, or the purpose of the encounter, or where the encounter leads us. Most times, in the actual time of prayer, they're not necessarily warm or fuzzy feelings. Sometimes there are. And that's the time when our faith is at its lowest ebb, and God gives it to us just to remind us that he is staying with us. But when our faith is at our normal ebb, there are not necessarily warm and fuzzy feelings. There are not necessarily bells, whistles, and a lot of things happening inside. There's actually an absence of that, because all there is a presence to God. And the whole of the meditation is just seeking the way to be present to Him. Now, after you recognize that things happen and there was joy, things happen and there is peace, that things that would normally have sent you upside down, swinging and swirling, and you've dealt with it with relative calm, that there is an inner contentment that you can't quite put your finger on, nor can you account for. So like the text, it is in hindsight, looking backwards, that you understand the value of the encounter, and you understand the depth of the encounter and the effects of the encounter on you. Were not our hearts burning within us as He spoke to us on the way about the scripture?
On the way.
On the way. Were not our hearts, and it's just looking backwards, the way you see, oh, there was an encounter. And sometimes, it takes a while of Christian meditation before the fruits of Christian meditation become evident. And unfortunately, people give up because in the first 3 seconds, they're not getting the mystical contemplation that they have read about or heard about or desired. But it is not, you don't go into the meditation for what you get out of the meditation. You go into the meditation to give God the gift of this 20 minutes of presence. Your presence to Him. And that is your present to Him. Just the breath, the mantra, the posture, bringing all of you in disposition to God, saying, I am here, and whatever you want with me, I am available.
And on a lot of levels, that's sort of like where all prayer is headed, isn't it? I mean, it is sort of the ultimate essence. I mean, I personally had got to a place in my own spiritual journey that I actually found my prayer life and was the most narcissistic place I was. It was when I became my most self-absorbed self.
Right.
Now, that was kind of bizarre. But when I hit that place, when my prayers were me, my spouse, my children, my siblings, and then the circles got bigger until eventually I reached mankind somewhere.
Somewhere there.
It's when I had a real break.
And Levinas would say to build, econo is to build a house.
Yeah.
And then the stranger come knocking at the door, and you have to choose now whether you let the stranger in, and then the village comes behind the stranger knocking, asking, and then. Because if we go to prayer, it could never remain narcissistic. The reason for going, like the reason for going to Emmaus, might be escape, fear, need, whatever, but it can't remain narcissistic, because the fact of going is also the fact of invitation. And if you're inviting the God who created the cosmos and everything therein, our hearts can't remain small, because this God is not small. And just the fact of being present to this God and opening ourselves to this God allows this exchange where we're having heart transplant in the midst of the meditation, and our hearts are being enlarged to the capacity of embracing more and more of the concerns of God.
So, Bishop, what are your thoughts and plans for utilizing this beautiful gift in your archdiocese or in your diocese in Barbados and in St. Vincent, in Bridgetown and in Kingstown? Where does the rubber hit the road, so to speak?
Well, Christian meditation is one of 5 prayer forms that I'm proposing for the diocese. Not everybody is reached by any one prayer form. And so Christian meditation, Lectio Divina, adoration, the rosary,
and the examen.
And the examen are the forms of prayer I'm proposing. And I've done little YouTube videos that we have on the website to people, why pray, what's the purpose of prayer, how do you pray, and then how do you pray. I talk about the 5, and then I do little videos on each of the 5. So that's one tangible that is done. The other real tangible, we've had somebody coming from the Christian meditation group in Trinidad. I don't know, you might know that group. You might have heard about them sometime or the other. Coming to both St. Vincent and to Barbados to work with Christian meditation. And they've done work with the schools. So the Catholic schools have been trained in a practice of Christian meditation, and some very interesting things are happening in the Catholic schools around Christian meditation. That there is a practice that is beginning, and the last time when we met all of the teachers, they started to recount some of the stories and some of the experiences and the ways that they've been working with this, and this has to be nurtured. It is my hope that Christian meditation is going to be implanted deeply into the school every morning. See, my dream would be every child in a Catholic school does Christian meditation every morning. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is. And if that were to happen, we would form the conscience of the next generation, and we would give that next generation a way of encountering God, and a way of having a spiritual practice that is real and tangible, that they've learned from young, and sometime later in their young adult or later life, that practice is going to come back at them. So that's the first thing. This is happening in both dioceses, but also there are groups in each diocese. So there's a Cluny sister, Sister Martha, in St. Vincent, who's taken on the role of promoting Christian meditation. She's teaching the school, but she's also religious, and so she's going to take a wider view in terms of the whole diocese to start up groups of Christian meditation. In Barbados, there's a long existing group of Christian meditation that goes way, way, way back. And they have been working, and they've just sponsored a new group. And I went with them a month ago and meditated on a Monday morning and spoke to the group, and where we are, what's happening, how are we going to develop, how are we going to move this thing forward. Because if people are invited to pray and to pray deeply within the Catholic tradition, the whole church transforms. You are touching this just now. The Holy Grail of the whole life of grace is bending our will to God's will. The technique, the path, the way, the method is really like using a Volkswagen as opposed to a Nissan, and it's really where God calls you many times. But the Holy Grail is when I can say, bend my heart to your will, O God. And not when I can say it, when I can actually live the bending of my heart to the will of God. And Christian meditation is a great way and a great tool for this, and a great path for this. And because it's such an old prayer, it goes back older than most of the other prayers.
Ancient church.
That it's really one of the prayers. I believe if we can bring people to this discipline, we could start seeing the transformation in the church and the energy of the new evangelization.
Of course, you've now given all the criteria and laid all the, made it easy for me to say why, as a result, that visitor to Barbados and St. Vincent who started this outreach.
Maxine, who's been on your program and is part of your community.
And Sister Ruth Montresor, who is our national coordinator. Yes. So they are our outreach, and they actually, I've interviewed them too, and they back up your description. And why, on their recommendation, the recommendation of Sister Ruth, you have been, in my understanding, you've accepted the patronage of the World Community for Christian Meditation for the Caribbean to become our patron. So I have to welcome you into that formally, and thank you for taking that role. But maybe, and it is a role for supporting us in this process and in this outreach and in this mission to spread Christian meditation throughout our region. So you're aware that you have accepted?
Oh, I am very aware that I have accepted.
It's very helpful.
And not just accepted, joyfully so.
Beautiful.
Joyfully so. I don't see it. There are different ways of understanding patronage. Sometimes the patron is from outside, lending the name to something inside. I don't see it that way. I see myself as part of the community of meditators. Meditation is a practice I do on a fairly regular basis. And so I don't see myself lending my title to the movement. I see myself as a fellow meditator who happens to be asked to do a particular ministry in the church, and would use that ministry and the office that the church has given to me to draw attention to a practice and a tradition that I think vital for the life of the church in this time. Many people talk about the new evangelization and will not put the new evangelization and Christian meditation together. But the new evangelization ultimately is about helping people to bend their will to God's will. And if Christian meditation is not about that, tell me what it is about. And in that sense, I see it as vital to the heartbeat of the church where we are now. If we don't invite people to the life of grace and to deep spiritual living, then what we will have is this external that we keep trying to dress up and dress up more nicely, but it's not going to work. It is the internal invitation that God is giving to us, where we need to come to the place where we are saying to God, and say it very insistently, stay with us, Lord. Stay with us, Lord, for it is nearly evening. And inviting God now to stay with us, as opposed to us thinking that we are doing something for God.
So I'm going to invite you now to stay with us. And as we invite God to stay with us strongly, urge strongly, to stay with us and close our program in meditation, I will say a little opening prayer. I will invite you to strike the gong.
Wow, I get to strike the gong. I'm impressed.
So are you the patron? And we'll close our program. Thank you, Bishop Jason.
Pleasure.
And we will close our program with meditation. Heavenly Father, open our hearts to the silent presence of the Spirit of your Son. Lead us into that mysterious silence where your love is revealed to all who call. Maranatha, come, Lord Jesus.